In the quiet, humid stillness that followed the spread of the Terrigen cloud across the earth, as cities adapted to the unpredictable blue haze that wandered like a ghostly weather front, rewriting the fate of anyone carrying dormant inhuman genes, a young college student named Ulysses Kane found himself standing on the threshold of a transformation that neither he nor the Inhuman royal family, nor any Avenger alive could ever hope to understand fully, because his awakening was not simply another case of terrigenesis, not merely the birth of a new set of powers, but the ignition of an ability so profound, so ethically explosive, and so cosmologically consequential that it would split the hero community in two and shake the very concept of free will to its core. Ulysses was not warrior, scientist, soldier, or prodigy. He was an ordinary student from Ohio State, someone whose life revolved more around exams, dorm friendships, and quiet ambitions than destiny or heroism. But destiny arrived anyway, wrapped in pale mist that coiled around campus like living memory of an alien world. As Terrigen Cloud passed, panic struck those aware of its meaning. Some feared death, others transformation, others hoped for powers that would change their lives. Ulysses felt fear, pure, disorienting, unfiltered fear, just before mist engulfed him, freezing his breath and turning world around him white, silent, impossibly still. Terrigenesis wrapped around him like cocoon, cracking space between heartbeats, shifting reality around his consciousness. And when Cocoon broke, he emerged not with claws or wings or enhanced strength, but with eyes that no longer belonged to present. He saw stars bending into shapes never witnessed. He saw purple horizon of Mars shatter under unknown force. He saw future layered atop present like overlapping transparency sheets. The first vision struck him so violently he screamed, collapsing into grass, tears streaming from eyes that had just witnessed horrors that technically hadn't happened yet, but would, or might, depending on choices heroes had not yet made. This was birth of his power, precognition, not in vague symbolic riddles or prophetic metaphors, but in full sensory immersion. Visions so real he felt heat of explosions, tasted smoke of burning cities, heard last breaths of those doomed in timelines that may or may not become reality. When Inhumans arrived, led by Medusa and Crystal, they found Ulysses trembling, overwhelmed, whispering fragments of what he had witnessed. At first, royal family believed he was simply another powerful addition to growing inhuman population that sprouted from Terrigen Cloud's passings. But as his visions intensified, with terrifying clarity and accuracy, Medusa recognized he wasn't simple addition. He was anomaly, a weapon, a puzzle, a responsibility none of them were prepared to manage. His first clear prediction involved minor threat, possible attack from rogue demon entity. Young, Inhumans tested power and he was right. Next prediction more complex, next even more. Within weeks, his visions became frighteningly precise, mapping out futures in which heroes died, villains triumphed, cities fell, wars erupted, and Inhumans who had long carried burden of destiny as cultural inheritance found themselves debating whether his gift was blessing or curse. But everything changed the moment his visions reached beyond Inhuman world and collided with Avengers, because Ulysses' next major vision, delivered in violent psychic flood that nearly knocked him unconscious, showed Thanos returning to Earth, targeting a classified facility holding cosmic artifact. The vision was so vivid that he felt temperature drop, saw darkness gather around Mad Titan like gravitational storm, heard screams of those who would die. In shock, Ulysses shared vision with Queen Medusa. She shared with Captain Marvel, and Carol Danvers, already leader predisposed toward proactive justice, saw in Ulysses not danger but opportunity, a way to prevent tragedies before they occurred, a tool to build safer world. a chance to erase mistakes of past by staying ahead of future. And so began secret collaboration between Inhumans and Carol, operating under assumption that visions represented truth, that future Ulysses saw was fixed enough that action could prevent it. Captain Marvel assembled strike team, SHIELD, Inhumans, and select Avengers mobilized quietly. All of them believed they were acting morally. They believed preventing future catastrophe justified bending rules. For Carol, who carried weight of countless battles and impossible decisions, this was not slippery slope but responsible leadership. For others, like War Machine, James Rhodes, decorated veteran, Avenger, friend, it was mission like any other, neutralize threat before lives lost. But for Tony Stark, who had not yet been informed, something about secrecy felt unsettling. Tony had rebuilt his worldview after First Civil War, after tragedies of Ultron, after endless cycles of politically and morally blurred conflicts. He believed deeply that hero community needed limits, structure, democratic oversight, not blind leaps into future. But he wasn't consulted, so when mission to stop Thanos unfolded, Tony was absent, and consequences devastating. As predicted, Thanos arrived, and team waited, believing they held upper hand. But predictions did not guarantee perfect outcomes. Battle was brutal, chaotic. Ulysses saw only outline of event, not granular details, not variables. Rhodes confronted Thanos directly, believing he could hold line. He couldn't. An explosion of cosmic energy and brute force. War Machine died, armor crushed, body broken instantly. She-Hulk fought valiantly, but suffered catastrophic injuries. And as dust settled, Captain Marvel, grief-stricken, bruised, exhausted, held Rhodes' body, whispering apologies soaked not only in sorrow but guilt. Guilt born from ambiguous responsibility. Vision had been right, but outcome devastating. When Tony Stark arrived too late, realizing mission happened based on prediction he never authorized, he broke down, not in anger alone, but fear. Fear of power uncontrolled, fear of slippery slope, fear that visions could create self-fulfilling prophecies. At Medical Bay, where She-Hulk fought for life, Tony demanded answers, and Carol revealed truth. They acted preemptively because Ulysses predicted it. Tony's voice cracked as he whispered, "Predicted. You killed my best friend on a guess." Carol fired back, "Not guess, a warning." This moment, this fracture, was spark that ignited second great conflict in superhuman community. Tony, devastated and furious, saw only one path forward: analyze Ulysses, understand technology or mysticism behind visions, determine whether predictions were trustworthy. He saw scientific responsibility. Carol saw obstruction. Tony saw danger. Carol saw opportunity. Tony saw violation of principles. Carol saw evolution of justice. And as they argued, heroes gathered behind them, choosing sides not by allegiance but ideology. Across nation, Ulysses struggled with guilt of vision that led to Rhodes' death. He never wanted to become weapon. He feared himself. Inhumans defended him, claiming he could help world avoid catastrophes. Some Avengers agreed. Spider-Man, Spectrum, even Black Panther saw potential, though with caution. Others hesitated, and Tony Stark, acting alone, kidnapped Ulysses, flying him to secret facility, desperate to test brain activity, neural pathways, data patterns. He didn't hurt him, he scanned him. He wanted truth, and truth he found shook him. Ulysses didn't see the future. He saw possible futures, shaped by emotional patterns, statistical projections, quantum fluctuations. They weren't certainties, they were branches, visions born in ocean of possibilities, meaning anyone acting on vision could change outcome or cause it. Tony emerged from lab pale, shaken, whispering truth that would define entire conflict. We can't arrest people for something they haven't done. But Carol saw Tony's findings differently. She believed Ulysses' visions were not mere probabilities. They were warnings given for reason. She believed ignoring them would lead to devastation. And so, ideological lines hardened. Responsibility versus liberty. Prevention versus freedom. Determinism versus choice. In some ways, Civil War II began not with punch, blast, or explosion, but with quiet tremor born from heart of young Inhuman confused by own existence. Ulysses never sought war. He was victim of one. His ability, gift or curse, became battlefield on which morality of entire hero community was tested. By time Tony and Carol confronted each other publicly for first time, world already whispering about conflict. Heroes who once fought side by side began watching each other differently. Trust eroded, and in shadows, Ulysses felt weight of being catalyst for divisions he never wished for. He wondered whether power meant responsibility, or burden too heavy for him to carry. And world around him prepared unknowingly for conflict that would reshape future of Avengers, Inhumans, and entire Marvel universe. Chapter 2. In the days following Ulysses' violent and disorienting awakening, as Inhumans struggled to understand the magnitude of his power, and Avengers fought quietly among themselves over ethics of using visions to guide action, a single prediction, the one that would soon be spoken of across world with mixture of awe, guilt, and disbelief, began to crystallize into event that neither hero nor villain could escape, because Ulysses did not merely see fragmentary glimpses of possible futures. He lived inside them, immersing consciousness in vivid simulations where emotion, pain, and consequence felt indistinguishable from reality itself. And when the image of Thanos descending upon Earth carved itself into his mind with precision of cosmic blade, Ulysses fell to knees, trembling as sensation of Titan's eyes burned into him like promise of catastrophe. His chest tightened, breath fractured, vision fractured into kaleidoscope of death and ruin. The arrival of Mad Titan at unlisted SHIELD facility. The cold metallic corridors illuminated by emergency lights. The flash of stolen cosmic cube fragments. The scream of alarms. The silhouette of War Machine crushed under blows so powerful universe seemed to pause, and the unmistakable sensation of tragedy that even Avengers could not prevent through normal means. When he regained control of body, still shaking uncontrollably, he went directly to Medusa and Crystal, his voice breaking as he described horror unfolding in mind. Inhuman royal family took him seriously. Terrigen-born visions were rare, but when they came with such clarity, they demanded attention. Medusa contacted Captain Marvel, who had already grown close to concept of using future as weapon for peace, seeing in Ulysses' gift not only strategic advantage but possibility of world with fewer graves, fewer regrets, fewer wars fought too late. And Carol Danvers, hardened by experience, leadership, and personal loss, received Ulysses' account with intensity bordering on grim determination. She saw threat, she saw opportunity, she saw duty, and she acted. The operation was assembled quietly, not because Carol intended secrecy for political advantage, but because she believed speed was necessary. Thanos was cosmic warlord whose strategies unfolded with ruthless efficiency, and the idea of him ambushing facility on Earth carried stakes too high for bureaucratic hesitation. Carol gathered those she trusted most. James Rhodey Rhodes, wearing War Machine armor equipped with upgrades designed for cosmic-level combat. Black Panther, analytical and calm, offering tactical structure. She-Hulk, whose raw power and sharp intellect could anchor battle. A contingent of Inhumans including Medusa and Crystal, and minor supporting allies whose roles would remain unsung but crucial. Captain Marvel briefed team with clarity. Mission was preemptive strike, based solely on Ulysses' vision. No other evidence, no surveillance intel, no cosmic readings indicating Thanos' arrival, nothing but psychic glimpse of future event that might unfold. For some this felt daring, for others deeply uncomfortable. But in presence of Carol's conviction, hesitation dissolved. Rhodey, the soldier among them, bought into mission wholeheartedly, not for philosophical reasons, but because he trusted Carol more than anyone. He believed in chain of command. He believed in doing what needed to be done. And deep down, he believed preventing catastrophic event before it happened was worth risk. They launched operation in silence, leaving Tony Stark unaware of events that would define next great fracture in hero community. When Thanos arrived, as Ulysses predicted, it was without grand declaration or earth-shaking entrance. He appeared inside secure boundary of Project Pegasus, materializing like void, peeling open around monstrous silhouette. Titan had come for a specific reason, retrieving fragment of cosmic cube stored inside facility. His mind was ironclad fortress built on centuries of cosmic conquest. He did not expect ambush, nor fear one. He moved through corridors with terrifying calm, claws and armor reflecting sterile lights of laboratory halls. But Avengers and Inhumans were already in position, having used Ulysses' vision as blueprint for interception. First contact occurred when Carol Danvers, glowing with energy, launched direct assault, striking Titan with force equivalent to missile impact. Thanos barely flinched. He turned, swung his arm, and shockwave from impact sent Carol skidding across reinforced metal floor. War Machine followed with barrage of missiles, each designed to disorient Titan. Explosion filled chamber with smoke. And yet Thanos emerged almost unscathed, stepping through debris like Titan born from core of dying star. The battle that unfolded was brutal and chaotic, each second slipping further from control as predictions failed to provide advantage heroes expected. In Ulysses' vision, event ended in catastrophe, but vision didn't clarify how to prevent it. Reality, even one glimpsed ahead of time, remained unpredictable. Rhodey took lead, firing precision blasts at Thanos' armor, forcing Titan to acknowledge him. Thanos, grinning almost casually, caught one of Rhodey's repulsors mid-attack, crushed it with one hand, and sent energy blast tearing through hull. She-Hulk intercepted, diverting impact but suffering massive internal trauma. She collapsed, whispering something none could hear over battle noise. Carol attempted to shield her. Thanos knocked Captain Marvel aside with blow that cracked ribs. Medusa and Crystal used coordinated Inhuman assault, hair hardened like steel, elemental blasts swirling in offensive pattern, but they could not match Thanos' raw cosmic brutality. Rhodey, watching team falter, engaged Thanos directly. He charged, armor thrusters blazing, slamming Titan with combined force of suit's kinetic amplifiers. For a moment, Rhodey held. Advantage collision sent Thanos stumbling backward, but Titan recovered instantly, gripping War Machine by helmet, lifting him like child's toy. Rhodey's last sight before crushing impact was Carol screaming his name. Thanos smashed him into ground with force that dented armor inward. Then he struck again, and world went still. When Thanos finally dropped lifeless body of War Machine, silence inside facility felt like universe mourning soldier who believed he fought to prevent tragedy. Carol Danvers reached him too late. She fell to knees beside him, ripping off pieces of battered armor, whispering his name, begging him to breathe. He didn't. Tony Stark wasn't there to witness friend's final moment. But vision of Thanos' defeat, because Avengers did ultimately force Titan's retreat, meant nothing compared to price paid. She-Hulk lay motionless, heart barely beating, life hanging by thread. Medusa carried Crystal away from collapsing rubble. Black Panther checked Rhodey's pulse twice before meeting Carol's eyes silently, confirming truth without words. Carol cradled Rhodey's helmet in trembling hands, whispering apologies soaked in grief, guilt, horror. But mission succeeded. Thanos captured. Victory felt hollow, poisoned by irreversible loss. News spread quickly, reaching Avengers SHIELD and Tony Stark nearly simultaneously. Tony flew to facility without speaking to anyone, landing amidst debris left by cosmic confrontation. When he saw Rhodes, lifeless on stretcher, armor dented beyond recognition, Tony collapsed inward, grief wrapped around him like crushing gravity. For a man whose life defined by technology, intellect, and control, realization that best friend died in mission he never sanctioned felt betrayal. Fury and heartbreak intertwined. When Carol tried to explain, Tony cut her off, voice sharp and brittle. You went to war because a kid saw something. Carol responded with equal intensity. He saw truth, Tony. If we hadn't gone, Thanos would have killed more. Tony shouted, You don't know that. She countered, Yes, we do. And that sentence, 6 words sharpened into blade, cut deeper than any wound Thanos inflicted. To Carol, Ulysses' vision was evidence. To Tony, it was guess dressed as prophecy. In Medical Bay, Tony watched She-Hulk struggle for life. When she regained consciousness briefly, Jennifer Walters whispered to Carol, forcing out words with broken breath, We did the right thing. Her voice small, fragile. Tony heard. Rage boiled. In his world, right thing didn't involve predicting crimes. Jennifer's body slipped back into coma. Tony left without looking at Carol. He returned to Stark Tower, replaying events repeatedly. Rhodey's death, Carol's justification, She-Hulk's words, and Ulysses' expression when news reached him, shock melting into guilt so intense he begged Inhumans not to use his powers again. He collapsed into Medusa's arms, whispering, I never meant, I never thought. But Carol insisted his power could save lives. Medusa protected him, arguing against Tony's anger, and Tony, spiraling between grief and scientific obsession, concluded only solution was understanding Ulysses, not trusting him, not weaponizing him, understanding him. This was moment Tony Stark crossed threshold not of villainy but desperation. He kidnapped Ulysses, not violently but decisively, transporting him to secret lab to analyze neural activity. He scanned brain, recorded data, ran simulations, interrogated variables. He was not torturer, he was scientist driven by grief. But to Inhumans, this was violation. To Carol, offensive betrayal. And to Ulysses, terrifying. Tony discovered predictions were not fixed futures, but probabilistic visions shaped by subconscious analysis of reality, massive involuntary computation of infinite variables. They were possibilities, not certainties, meaning Rhodey died for possibility, meaning She-Hulk almost died for possibility, meaning Carol's entire strategy rested on faith, not truth. As Tony emerged from lab, pale, exhausted, eyes hollow, he whispered, We cannot use this, not like this. But Carol saw different truth. Visions had saved Earth from Thanos. Her grief reinforced belief that mission, painful as it was, had been necessary. Tony saw Ulysses as warning against predictive justice. Carol saw him as guide for a better world. Tony saw threats to liberty. Carol saw threats prevented. Tony mourned friend. Carol mourned world she feared losing. And thus, death of war machine became cost of prediction. Price paid by hero community for believing future could be controlled. It ignited rift, deepened conflict, and set stage for chain of tragedies that would ripple across Marvel universe, culminating in trial, betrayal, public outrage, and final confrontation that would shatter Iron Man and remake Captain Marvel. And Ulysses, sitting alone, trembling, felt weight of responsibility crush him. A boy with gift he never asked for, born into role that would define fate of world. Chapter 3: Tony Stark's decision to take Ulysses into his custody, to remove him physically from protection of the Inhumans and psychologically from influence of Captain Marvel, marked the moment the conflict shifted from grief-driven confusion into deliberate ideological war, because Tony did not act out of vengeance or cruelty or political theater, but from desperation born of watching his best friend die in front of him. Even if he hadn't been physically present when Rhodey's armor caved in under Thanos' hand, the emotional weight of that absence haunted every breath he took, and from profound fear that the world's heroes were standing on edge of philosophical cliff they didn't fully understand. When Tony arrived in Aurora Labs, a remote, heavily shielded Stark-run facility, chosen specifically because it was isolated enough to avoid detection by Inhumans, SHIELD loyalists or Carol supporters, he carried Ulysses not like prisoner but like volatile puzzle, placing him gently on diagnostic platform, as if terrified that single misstep would trigger another vision or another death. The boy trembled, unsure whether he was being rescued or abducted, yet unable to resist because truth had settled heavy on him after War Machine's death. His visions were dangerous, uncontrollable, and possibly responsible for destruction of people he admired. Tony tried to reassure him, speaking with tone stripped of armor and bravado, telling him that nothing would be done without consent, that he didn't want to hurt him, that he only wanted to understand how his mind produced predictions, so vivid they could bend decisions of gods and soldiers alike. But words were thin compared to grief twisting Tony's chest, to fear in Ulysses' eyes, to tension pulsing through air as machines hummed to life. Tony didn't see Ulysses as threat. He saw him as anomaly requiring scientific clarity. He calibrated neurosynaptic scanners, energy frequency reflectors, and molecular resonance imagers, technology Stark had developed across years of analyzing cosmic anomalies, psychic disturbances, temporal distortions, and magical signatures. He wanted to dissect function of Ulysses's visions, not ethically, but biologically, neurologically, mathematically. He wanted proof that could justify or invalidate Carol's use of voice power, and when analysis began, Tony found something unexpected. Ulysses' brain activity didn't match known psychic patterns like Charles Xavier's telepathy, nor cosmic foresight like eternity's manifestations, nor probability manipulation like Scarlet Witch's early mutation. Instead, his mind lit up like computational engine, processing environmental variables, emotional tones, micro-expressions, quantum fluctuations, cosmic background energy, and minuscule probability threads woven throughout reality. Ulysses didn't see the future, Ulysses ran it. Entire potential timelines surged across synapses that behaved like hybrid of human brain, inhuman enhancement, and something else, something Tony could not categorize because it resembled predictive algorithm of supercomputer rather than mystical vision. And yet, visions felt real because Ulysses' brain simulated future at fidelity so intense that his senses convinced him the simulation was future. His consciousness did not foresee, it inhabited possibility. That meant predictions were not fixed points, but computed projections, branches, outcomes, maybes. As Tony processed discovery, his grief tangled with panic, because this meant every action taken based on Ulysses' visions could alter outcome. It meant vision of Thanos wasn't immutable truth. It was one possibility. It meant Rhodes might have died, not because future was inevitable, but because heroes acted on vision. It meant She-Hulk's near death was triggered by chain reaction, tied to Carol's proactive strike. It meant Carol, thinking she was preventing tragedy, might be creating it. And for Tony, who lived through fallout of Civil War bomb and feared returning to world of preemptive policing, this truth was invisible nightmare unfolding in real time. He confronted Ulysses with gentleness, asking whether he realized his visions might be interpretations, not certainties. Ulysses, shaking, whispered that he didn't know what they were, that he only saw what he saw. Tony placed hand on his shoulder, compassion replacing anger for first time since Rhodey's death. None of this is your fault, he said quietly, but we have to make sure it doesn't happen again. While Tony ran deeper scans, Inhumans learned of abduction. Karnak, master of identifying flaws in any system, declared Tony's logic misguided, calling his interference violation of Inhuman sovereignty. Medusa, livid, mobilized search parties, while Crystal argued Ulysses' mental state was fragile and Stark's tests could irreparably damage him. The tension escalated into near diplomatic crisis between Inhumans and Avengers. Carol, informed by Medusa, felt betrayal cut through her like blade. Tony Stark, acting alone again, disregarded her leadership and undermined Avengers' unity. She rallied loyalists, Spectrum, Maria Hill, Black Panther, though T'Challa walked tightrope between logic and neutrality, and others who believed controlling Ulysses meant protecting world. Carol viewed Tony's abduction as reckless, perhaps even criminal, because her philosophy hinged on belief that Ulysses' visions were moral obligation, not scientific curiosity. To Carol, Tony wasn't trying to help. He was trying to dismantle a tool that could save countless lives. But Tony wasn't finished. After final round of scans, he made chilling discovery. Ulysses' visions could be influenced by emotional proximity, environmental stimulus, and presence of certain individuals, meaning heroes standing near him could unconsciously shape outcome he predicted, meaning visions weren't windows but mirrors, reflecting tension surrounding him, meaning the more the world relied on his predictions, the more predictions could mutate. When Tony confronted Carol with data, she refused validity of his interpretation. "I've seen his visions," she said. "They're real." Tony countered, "Real doesn't mean inevitable." Their argument exploded into full-scale clash that reverberated across entire hero community. Tony released public statement exposing possibility that Ulysses' visions were probabilistic projections, not future glimpses. Carol responded with counter-broadcast emphasizing success of Thanos' mission, not mentioning Rhodey's death, but highlighting that Earth survived cosmic threat. Media, already shaken by news of War Machine's death, split into factions, mirroring division among heroes. Some civilians praised Carol for saving world through preventative action, citing police tactics, military strategies, real-world parallels. Others sided with Tony, fearing dystopian consequences of justice based on prediction, rather than evidence. America itself began to fracture. Meanwhile, Inhumans finally located facility where Ulysses held. Karnak led strike team, not to start war but to retrieve boy whose powers they believed were Inhuman responsibility alone. But before they could reach him, Ulysses experienced new, violent vision, one so intense that Tony's equipment nearly overloaded. He screamed as images flooded mind. Hulk Bruce Banner, towering above field of dead heroes, rage erupting in green fire, destruction sweeping across landscape as though anger itself had become living weapon. Vision so vivid it brought Ulysses to tears. When Tony heard description, he froze, horror settling in. Bruce Banner had retired from Hulk transformation for months, studying ways to prevent future rampages, living in research cabin far from conflict. But Ulysses' vision placed him at center of massacre. Tony knew Bruce personally, friends, scientists, survivors of past mistakes, and possibility that world would act on vision terrified him. But Carol, learning simultaneously from Medusa, reacted opposite way. She declared immediate intervention necessary if Ulysses saw Hulk killing heroes. They had duty to prevent scenario. Carol mobilized Avengers and Inhumans. Tony begged them to stop, insisting vision was possibility, not fact. Heroes surrounded Bruce's cabin, confronting him gently at first, then urgently when he panicked. Bruce admitted he'd been experimenting with Gamma just in case transformation ever returned. He was scared of himself, scared of what vision might mean, and then, in moment that shattered Marvel community, Clint Barton, Hawkeye standing far away with specialized Gamma, arrow Bruce had previously given him, in case I ever lose control, believed Bruce's sudden eye glow indicated transformation was beginning. Clint fired, Bruce died instantly, and universe stood still. When Tony saw Bruce Banner's body, lifeless, silent, robbed of humanity he fought so hard to protect, he broke. Fully, completely. He looked at Carol with disbelief so raw it felt like scream. Carol insisted they couldn't risk Hulk rampage. Tony shouted until throat tore. He wasn't transforming. Hawkeye surrendered himself immediately, claiming Bruce gave him permission. Legal system took over. Carol justified actions. Tony buried friend. And in autopsy room, where he removed gamma residue from Bruce's body and replayed scene through Stark tech enhancements, Tony realized something. Ulysses' vision wasn't accurate representation. It was influenced by Bruce's own fear of relapse and world's perception of Hulk's danger. Vision wasn't prophecy, it was psychological echo, and yet Bruce died for it. This was point of no return. Tony vowed to stop Carol from using Ulysses ever again. Carol vowed to stop Tony from interfering with protection of Earth. Clint's trial polarized the entire world. Jennifer Walters woke from coma, whispered to Carol that future they fought for justified sacrifice, then collapsed again, words Tony overheard like accusation. And Ulysses, shaken beyond measure, wanted to disappear, terrified his power would kill more. Tony tried to reassure him, but knew truth. War had begun. Not because heroes wanted fight, but because belief in future had become weapon impossible to control. Tony released full scientific findings. Carol countered with data, showing predictions prevented Thanos' success. Tony accused her of using visions to justify pre-crime authoritarianism. Carol accused him of letting people die for sake of idealism. Entire Marvel universe split, not by allegiance but ideology. Lines drawn, friendships broken, teams dissolved, and Ulysses, at center of conflict, sat alone, wishing he had never gone through Terrigen Cloud, wishing world didn't depend on visions he could not trust. Civil War II was no longer about Inhumans, Avengers, or government oversight. It was about future itself and who had right to shape it. Chapter 4. As the shockwaves of Bruce Banner's death rippled outward through hero community like silent detonation, whose pressure did not break buildings but trust, alliances, and the fragile moral spine of entire universe, the world found itself no longer asking whether a second civil war would occur, but when, because in the aftermath of that impossible moment, Hawkeye lowering bow with trembling hands, Bruce Banner's body cooling in shadow of cabin he had chosen as sanctuary, and Avengers standing frozen in tableau of disbelief, the ideological fault lines that had been forming beneath surface now cracked open fully, forcing every hero, every Inhuman, every government observer, and every civilian to choose not simply a side but worldview, whether future should be treated as immutable truth or dangerous mirage that could distort justice beyond recognition. When news broke, media erupted instantly, feeding on sensationalism that overshadowed nuance. Headlines blared, Hulk killed by Avenger. Heroes turn on one of their own. Is preventative justice the future? Cable networks dissected autopsy reports before Tony Stark could even process them. Citizens debated in streets, governments demanded explanations, and inside Avengers facilities, those that remained unified, shock curdled into despair. Tony Stark became lightning rod of grief, guilt, and fury. Every breath he took felt heavier as he replayed scene through augmented reconstructions, searching for evidence, any evidence that Bruce Banner had shown sign of imminent transformation. Tony found nothing, no gamma fluctuations, no physiological shift, no micro-expression indicating rage trigger. Nothing except fear in Bruce's eyes, fear of vision, fear of himself, fear planted by world that believed Hulk could only ever be catastrophe waiting to happen. Tony whispered to holographic recording, "You weren't going to change." Voice shrinking into quiet apology, meant for a friend who would never hear it. Meanwhile, Carol Danvers maintained that intervention was necessary, that even uncertainty justified decisive action, especially when stakes involved potential deaths of countless heroes. She believed Clint acted precisely under contingency Bruce himself had set. To Carol, Bruce's request to Clint wasn't just permission, it was final acknowledgement of danger he might pose. But to Tony, Clint's shot was culmination of system gone wrong, proof that prediction-based justice had already crossed ethical boundary that could not be uncrossed. It was in this atmosphere, raw, volatile, brimming with ideological tension, that lines between factions began hardening like cooling metal, creating two competing visions for future of heroism. Those who rallied behind Captain Marvel saw in her leadership a necessary evolution of Avengers' mission. World had changed, threats had evolved, and the old model reacting after tragedies unfolded felt antiquated, irresponsible even. They saw Ulysses' power not as invasion of free will, but tool equivalent to advanced surveillance or early warning systems. They believed Carol's approach could prevent Sokovia-like catastrophes, Ultron-level destruction, Thanos-scale invasions. Supporters included heroes who trusted Carol personally or believed responsibility meant preventing harm before it occurred. Spectrum, who knew firsthand what large-scale disasters cost. Blue Marvel, who approached cosmic threats with scientific pragmatism. Captain America, Sam Wilson, who wrestled internally with concept but understood weight of leadership, and various cosmic allies who saw galaxy not as safe battleground but unpredictable theater where seconds meant millions of lives. Many Inhumans sided with Carol as well, not out of ideology, but because Ulysses was theirs, and protecting him meant protecting Inhuman sovereignty. Medusa, Karnak, Crystal, and Iso treated Ulysses as sacred trust. Karnak, with his cold analytical logic, argued that ignoring accurate predictions was flaw too dangerous for humanity's future. On opposite side, Tony Stark gathered those who believed that future, no matter how vivid, must never dictate present action. His supporters included Spider-Man, Peter Parker, shattered by memory of Gwen Stacy, and terrified of world where authorities could preemptively imprison people for acts they might never commit. Black Widow, who learned too well consequences of weaponizing intelligence. Luke Cage and Jessica Jones, defenders of street-level justice rooted in real evidence, not prophecy. Doctor Strange, who understood difference between mystical precognition and dangerous conflation of possibility with destiny. And even Steve Rogers, though Steve's complex standing at time intertwined with secret empire developments, placed him in morally ambiguous role. He sided publicly with Tony's view on free will. For Tony's faction, Ulysses represented existential threat to personal autonomy, legal structures, and fundamental principle that heroes should protect world without becoming its judges. Tony gathered them in secure facility, outlining scientific evidence. Ulysses' visions were probabilistic, not absolute. He showed data demonstrating emotional bias influencing predictions. He explained how feedback loop world reacting to visions could manipulate future, making predictions dangerously self-fulfilling. His supporters listened gravely. When he finished, Peter Parker whispered, "We're arresting people for something they haven't done." And tension in room dissolved into stunned silence. From outside worlds saw two charismatic leaders shaping paths toward diametrically opposed futures. Inside hero community, fear spread like infection. Their debates were not philosophical luxuries. They were life or death frameworks determining whether next battle would prevent tragedy or cause it. The death of Hulk and War Machine already proved cost of miscalculated vision. Public trust fractured. Government agencies, SHIELD, UN committees, and remnants of pre-Sokovia Accords boards began asking who had authority over Ulysses' power. Some wanted him registered, others monitored, others removed entirely from decision-making processes. Carol fiercely defended him. Tony believed he needed to be protected from exploitation. Inhumans believed humanity had no right to regulate their own. Pressure mounted. Meanwhile, Ulysses, still shaken by guilt, retreated emotionally, experiencing visions more frequently and more violently. His mind became battleground. Future threats tugged at him, each more terrifying than last, blurring boundary between foresight and hallucination. Medusa shielded him from political chaos, but even she couldn't prevent psychic overload. In one particularly intense episode, Ulysses collapsed, screaming as vision consumed him. Heroes dying, cities burning, fractures across globe. In scene, he watched Tony Stark standing over Graveyard of Avengers. When he described vision, Carol insisted Tony was too dangerous to ignore any longer. Tony argued Ulysses was projecting fear, not reality. Inhumans began seeing Tony as threat to safety. Avengers began seeing Carol as threat to liberty. And so lines carved deeper. It was during emergency summit meant to de-escalate tensions that final break occurred. Meeting included Inhumans, Avengers, Guardians stationed on Earth, mutants represented by Storm and Old Man Logan, and several neutral heroes attempting mediation. Tony presented findings calmly, pleading for restraint. Carol rebutted by pointing to lives saved in Thanos' battle, blaming deaths on execution, not principle. Tensions ignited when Ulysses, overwhelmed by emotional conflict in room, suffered vision so intense it projected telepathically across space. Everyone saw it simultaneously, a catastrophic event involving giant, monstrous celestial construct descending to Earth. Noise in room erupted instantly. Panic, shouting, Carol issuing immediate commands, Tony demanding nobody act until analysis done. Within minutes, Carol mobilized team to intercept threat. Tony attempted interception of her, causing small skirmish. But Ulysses' vision was correct this time. Celestial Destructor arrived. Avengers engaged. World trembled. But threat was neutralized, but not because vision provided advantage, but because of Blue Marvel's scientific preparation and cooperation with Ultimates. Yet Carol credited success to Ulysses' power. Tony argued it was coincidence. Their feud, now public, unstoppable. Lines in sand hardened further. In following days, heroes confronted one another during minor missions, ideological tension contaminating teamwork. Confrontations escalated from argument to violence. Ulysses saw glimpses of outcomes and panicked, begging both sides to stop. Nobody listened. He was no longer boy with gift. He had become symbol, one too powerful to exist without war forming around him. For public, for governments, for heroes, Ulysses was both beacon and curse. He didn't want role, but couldn't escape it. This was moment's civil war. Two became inevitable. Not because heroes wanted conflict, not because villains manipulated from shadows, but because two philosophies, both noble, both dangerous, crashed like tectonic plates beneath civilization. One side sought safety, other liberty, and Ulysses stood at the epicenter, wondering whether future he saw was nightmare of world tearing itself apart, or one they were building with every choice made in his name. Chapter 5. The death of Bruce Banner did not simply deepen the fault line between Tony Stark and Carol Danvers, it detonated it, sending ideological shrapnel across every corner of the hero community until no team, no friendship, no alliance remained untouched. Because for the first time since the original Superhuman Registration Act crisis, heroes found themselves forced to confront not just laws or politics, but the very nature of what justice meant. And nowhere did this confrontation crystallize more painfully than in the events surrounding the fallout of Bruce Banner's killing, the trial of Clint Barton, and the slow, relentless tearing apart of trust that had once held Avengers together like unspoken oath. In days immediately following Banner's death, the world became tinderbox of fear, outrage, grief, and confusion. News channels replayed moment. Clint loosed arrow in slow motion, analyzing frame by frame whether glow in Banner's eyes signaled transformation or trick of light. Social media erupted with factions supporting Clint as hero who prevented catastrophe, while others condemned him as murderer acting on unverified prophecy. And governments demanded inquiry into why Avengers executed one of their own without oversight. But beneath all noise, one truth pulsed like heartbeat. Nothing about this was simple, not ethically, not emotionally, not politically. Tony Stark sat alone in lab, reviewing data again and again, desperately seeking explanation that would make sense of horror. He ran gamma scans, reconstructed scene through holographic projectors, measured energy patterns, and tested dozens of hypothetical stress responses Banner might have exhibited. But results remained unchanged. Bruce was not hulking out. He was afraid, cornered, overwhelmed by a cluster of heroes confronting him. Fear did not equal transformation. Fear did not justify execution. Tony confronted Clint before authorities took him. Clint Barton, eyes hollow and aging in ways battle scars alone could not explain, admitted truth calmly. Bruce had given him arrow months prior, saying if he ever saw that look again, any sign he might lose control, Clint should end it quickly, decisively. Clint insisted Banner wanted guarantee world would be safe. Tony shouted back that wanting contingency was not same as imminent threat, not same as justice. Clint argued he acted because he saw a flicker of green in Bruce's eyes. Tony responded that fear shapes perception, and visions shape fear. Ulysses' prophecy infected everyone long before arrow flew. Clint surrendered to authorities voluntarily, believing he had fulfilled promise. Tony watched him led away while gripping sides of tables so tightly his fingers bloodied. He was breaking physically, emotionally, ideologically. Carol Danvers, meanwhile, stood on opposite end of moral chasm, justifying action as tragic necessity. She did not celebrate Bruce's death. She had mourned him with real tears, but she believed deeply, painfully, that ignoring Ulysses' vision would have resulted in disaster far worse. To her, Hulk was unpredictable element no team, no law, no promise could fully contain. She had witnessed too many worlds fall because heroes hesitated. She believed preventing Bruce's possible rampage saved lives, even if cost unbearable. But her conviction hardened. She began to believe resisting Ulysses' power meant allowing catastrophe to thrive, and she saw in Tony someone clinging to outdated models, heroics forged on reaction rather than prevention. She was wrong. Tony was terrified of a world where heroes acted before thought. As tension grew, Ulysses, at heart of conflict, felt guilt devouring him like phantom parasite. He replayed vision of Hulk slaughtering heroes, asking himself endlessly, did I cause this? Medusa reminded him visions were warnings, not commands. But he remained terrified that future he saw, one possible future, became real because people acted on it. His powers worsened, each new vision more violent than last, ripping into mind with clarity that made him tremble, cry, scream. Karnak analyzed Boy's visions, noting disturbing trend. Each new prediction more dramatic, more apocalyptic, more emotionally charged. Karnak, master of identifying flaws, recognized flaw. Ulysses' visions were becoming shaped by conflict surrounding him. The boy was no longer neutral observer, he was emotional participant, and his visions mirrored chaos of hero community. That chaos reverberated through Clint Barton's trial. Proceedings transformed into global spectacle. Media framed Clint as assassin, martyr, hero, traitor. Courtroom filled with heroes on both sides. Carol sat in front row, jaw clenched, expression solemn. Tony glared from opposite side, fists trembling. Trial hinged on whether Clint acted in self-defense or murder. Clint testified quietly. Bruce gave him arrow. Bruce said kill him if he ever lost control. Clint said he trusted his instincts. Carol's faction argued Clint saved lives. Tony's argued he ended life based on fear. But trial held a deeper significance. It was referendum on Ulysses himself. Prosecutors argued prophecy cannot justify execution. Defense argued ignoring prophecy invites disaster. Jury split, society split, even Avengers split. But verdict came, not guilty. Jury accepted Bruce's prior consent. Tony stormed out. Carol exhaled quietly, relieved but shaken. Public furor intensified. Ulysses spiraled emotionally, experiencing new visions while sitting in Inhuman Tower, explosions across Manhattan, collapse of alien citadel, death of Captain Marvel herself, then contradictory visions seconds later. Karnak realized Boy was no longer predicting future. He was drowning in futures. And so, tension escalated until next vision, lit fuse for second explosion. Ulysses, during moment of near collapse, experienced vision so terrifying it sent shockwave through everyone nearby. A catastrophic battle in which Miles Morales, the young Spider-Man, stood over body of Captain America, Steve Rogers, on steps of Capitol building, shield shattered, Captain America dead. Vision spread instantly through psychic projection, affecting not just Inhumans but heroes in vicinity and beyond. This was vision that would break world. Carol, upon hearing vision, felt moral duty intensify. She believed preventing Steve's death required detaining Miles. She didn't want to imprison him. She wanted to protect him from future. Tony saw this as authoritarian nightmare, arresting child for murder he hadn't committed and might never commit. Steve Rogers himself, unaware of Hydra influence shaping him secretly, stood at center of destiny. Neither side fully understood. Yet the vision became tipping point. Tony vowed to protect Miles from Carol. Carol vowed to protect world from vision. Ulysses wept, begging them not to act on vision. But his fear made predictions seem more real. Lines once metaphorical now became physical. Heroes assembled under banners of two leaders. Captain Marvel's team wore expression of grim determination. Tony Stark's team carried grief hardened into resolve. Even neutral parties were forced to choose. Old Man Logan joined Tony, recognizing dangers of controlling future. Storm counseled calm but could not stop Storm. Young heroes like Kamala Khan, devoted once to Carol, began questioning Mentor's direction, and world watched, terrified. Thus war approached not as explosion, but gravitational pull, inevitable, heavy, tragic. And at center stood Ulysses, boy whose gift became curse, whose visions became battleground, whose existence forced everyone to examine whether future was enemy or tool. This was moment where Civil War II ceased being political dispute and became existential philosophy. Is future destiny or threat? Do heroes prevent harm or honor freedom? When vision shows death, do you act or abstain? Every hero answered differently, and universe braced for collision that would shake Marvel Universe to core. Chapter 6: The Trial of Clint Barton, though outwardly a legal proceeding governed by human institutions and ordinary courtroom procedure, was in truth a tribunal on the soul of the superhero community, a slow unspooling of grief, fear, ideology, and fractured trust that placed every hero under microscope of public judgment, because while Clint himself sat in defendant's chair, with posture of man prepared to accept whatever verdict world offered, the true subjects of the trial were Tony Stark, Carol Danvers, Ulysses Kane, and the very concept of justice they had reshaped through their escalating conflict. And from the moment jury delivered the not guilty verdict, every thread of tension that had been quietly strangling unity of hero community tightened into knot that refused to loosen, setting stage for next devastating escalation that none of them were prepared to confront. Clint's absolution struck both sides differently. For supporters of Carol, it served as validation that Bruce Banner's death was not unjustified murder, but tragic necessity grounded in Bruce's explicit contingency plan. For Tony's faction, verdict represented legal failure, a sign that fear of prophecy could override both autonomy and evidence, and that world was ready to excuse lethal action based solely on hypothetical futures. The courtroom emptied under weight of moral exhaustion, leaving Clint alone with knowledge that he had honored Bruce's request but shattered unity of heroes in process. Outside courthouse, cameras swarmed, broadcasting reactions across globe, some cheering Clint as protector, others condemning him as weapon of pre-crime ideology. Protesters clashed, governments hesitated, and Marvel Universe drifted one step closer to moral collapse. Meanwhile, Tony Stark slipped deeper into grief-fueled determination. As soon as Clint's trial ended, Tony retreated to private lab where holograms of Bruce Banner flickered across darkened walls. He projected vision Ulysses had seen, overlaying gamma sensors, emotional readings, micro-muscle twitch data, everything he could gather to prove Bruce wasn't transforming. Tears came not because he doubted himself, but because evidence confirmed truth again and again. Bruce died for future that hadn't happened, future that might never have happened, future shaped by fear, not fact. Tony clenched fists, whispering broken apology to Bruce's holographic shell, and vowed to stop Carol's approach before more blood spilled. He gathered allies, all equally shaken. Peter Parker, who blamed himself for being unable to protect innocents in past. Luke Cage, who feared consequences of policing thought rather than action. Jessica Jones, who saw in Carol's worldview echoes of systems that exploited her trauma. And Doctor Strange, who warned that tampering with timeline possibilities, treating predicted outcomes as certainties, risked inviting cosmic backlash. Strange explained gently that visions like Ulysses's bordered on precognitive echo, a dangerous blend of psionic sensitivity and probability crystallization, something universe itself might resist. Tony listened, absorbing every word like fuel for mission he hated but believed necessary. At the same time, Carol Danvers, under weight of leading global security initiative, surrounded herself with allies convinced that world could not afford hesitation. She sought comfort in Monica Rambeau, who reminded her that leadership required unpopular decisions. She spoke with Black Panther, who did not fully support her methods but respected her commitment to global safeguard. She consulted Abigail Brand, whose experience with interstellar threats drove pragmatism bordering ruthlessness, and Carol kept returning to Thanos' incident not to justify War Machine's death, which she mourned deeply, but to reinforce notion that Earth had survived cosmic incursion precisely because they acted on Ulysses' vision. In her eyes, saving billions outweighed consequences of uncertain future, but cracks formed beneath surface of her certainty. Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel, Carol's protege, began questioning Mentor's choices. Spider-Man, young and idealistic, recoiled from idea that future crimes warranted preemptive imprisonment. Even some ultimates debated whether Carol's path resembled enforcement rather than heroism. Yet Carol pressed on, believing Tony's resistance endangered everything. Caught between factions, Ulysses deteriorated. Each new vision assaulted him with sensory overload. Thousands of futures unfolding simultaneously, emotional echoes spilling into present. He saw Carol falling in battle. He saw Tony's armor shattering under cosmic force. He saw cities collapsing, heroes turning against each other. Miles Morales crying over body of Captain America, endless permutations of disaster. He begged Medusa to hide him, to shield him from world he had unwillingly reshaped. Karnak studied him relentlessly, recognizing power becoming unstable, no longer external prediction, but self-reinforcing cycle tied to conflict surrounding him. Karnak feared boy approaching threshold beyond which visions would no longer simply reflect future, but begin influencing it. And that fear became reality during tense meeting between Avengers factions attempting peace talks. Summit convened in neutral location, abandoned Stark Industries facility repurposed for crisis negotiation. Tony and Carol stood across from each other, separated by table and unresolved grief. Tony presented new data showing Ulysses' predictions were not fixed, subject to emotional contamination. Carol rejected conclusion, claiming Tony's analysis biased by trauma. Arguments escalated rapidly. Tony demanded Ulysses removed from tactical operations. Carol demanded Tony stop undermining global security. Storm, ever diplomat, urged compromise. T'Challa recommended multi-layered oversight committee. Reed Richards, attending virtually, warned of quantum consequences tied to precognition. But before discussion could progress, Ulysses, present only because Carol insisted his input necessary, suffered catastrophic vision. His scream broke conversation mid-sentence, echoing off walls like psychic shockwave. Light burst from his eyes, flooding room with projected hallucinations so powerful every hero in attendance saw it simultaneously. Miles Morales standing on steps of Capitol building, holding body of Steve Rogers, Captain America, killed by Miles' own hand. Gasps filled chamber. Steve stared at image of himself dead, his shield cracked. Carol's eyes widened with dread. Tony froze, horrified, but emotional responses diverged instantly. Carol saw warning demanding action. Tony saw danger of prophecy manipulating events. Steve saw potential threat to young hero he cared for. And Miles saw nightmare so terrifying he nearly fainted. This singular vision tore world apart. Carol acted immediately, insisting Miles placed under protective custody, not because she believed he was murderer, but because she believed preventing his presence in Washington was only way to avoid future. Tony erupted, calling action, kidnapping justified by hallucination. Carol said, voice cracking, "You saw it too." Tony answered, I saw possibility, not destiny. And so lines between them became impenetrable. They left Summit not as comrades but enemies. Carol moved quickly. She found Miles Morales on rooftop, trembling from shock of vision. She approached him gently, voice soft, promising protection. Miles resisted, terrified of being blamed for a future he didn't understand. Carol reached for him. Tony swooped in, blasting Carol aside with repulsor beam. His armor locked around Miles protectively. Carol shouted Tony's name, warning he endangered world. He shouted back, You're arresting a child for something he hasn't done. Heroes assembled behind them as fault lines materialized physically. Captain Marvel's faction ready to detain, Tony's ready to defend. Fists clenched, powers flared, and universe braced for collision. But before battle erupted fully, Ulysses collapsed into deeper trance, experiencing chain of visions cascading through his mind, fragments of possible futures involving guardians of the galaxy, X-Men, cosmic beings, temporal fractures, each contradicting previous ones. He saw dozens of different versions of capital confrontation. Miles killing Steve, Miles saving Steve, Steve killing Miles by accident, both surviving unharmed, neither present when attack occurred. Karnak and Medusa watched helplessly as Boyd drifted into near catatonic state from overload. As factions prepared for next move, leadership of both sides recognized unspoken truth. Next event would determine direction of hero community irrevocably. Tony, convinced future undefined and thus malleable, believed restricting Miles would cause catastrophe. Carol, convinced tragedies must be prevented before unfolding, believed freeing Miles risked Steve's death. And in this stalemate of moral philosophies, every hero had to choose. Young heroes chose more painfully. Kamala Khan, once Carol's strongest supporter, defected after witnessing Carol attempt to confine Miles. She gathered champions, declaring they could not support world where teenagers imprisoned for hypothetical crimes. Vision, the synthezoid, warned that acting on visions undermined humanity. Nova and Cyclops, young version, joined Dissent, but older heroes leaned heavily on battle-worn experience. Spectrum and Blue Marvel stood with Carol, Black Widow and Luke Cage with Tony. Doctor Strange remained cautiously allied with Stark. Government agencies added fuel. Some demanded immediate action to detain Miles. Others warned intervention would violate constitutional rights. Public panic rose as Ulysses' projected vision spread across world. News outlets showing image of teenage Spider-Man killing beloved national icon. Life for Miles Morales became nightmare. Reporters stalked him, citizens demanded answers, and he feared even leaving home. Finally, everything converged on Washington, D.C., steps of Capitol building, precisely where Vision placed Miles Morales and Captain America. Tony and Carol both raced to sight, each determined to shape future their way. Miles, wrestling with fear and courage, chose to go as well, not to fulfill prophecy but to prove future not fixed. Steve Rogers, carrying shield alive in present, stepped forward calmly, telling Miles he believed in him, vision or not. Tony arrived in Iron Man armor, ready to defend Miles at any cost. Carol arrived with Squadron, ready to prevent disaster even if it meant confrontation. And as two leaders faced each other under shadow of Capitol, surrounded by heroes aligned along ideological lines, Ulysses, far away, drifting inside storm of visions, saw futures collapsing into moment of singularity. This was not simply next step in conflict. It was unavoidable collision, catalyst, breaking point, moment where ideology became battlefield and personal grief became weapon. Civil War II was no longer about Ulysses, or Bruce, or Clint. It was about what heroism meant in a world where future could be seen but never known. Chapter 7. In the heavy quiet that settled over Washington like prelude to storm, as the Capitol dome reflected early light in soft white glow, and the world held breath awaiting confrontation, predicted in vision no one fully trusted, yet everyone feared, Ulysses Kane drifted deeper into a sea of possibilities than ever before, his consciousness no longer anchored to present, but spiraling through branching futures that poured through him like flood of cascading timelines spliced by fear, hope, panic, and emotion of those converging on steps of nation's most symbolic building. Because as Tony Stark and Carol Danvers raced toward inevitable collision, dragging behind them armies of heroes whose loyalties had hardened into script none of them realized they were following, Ulysses became unwilling lens through which universe refracted itself, showing him infinite variations of a single moment, Miles Morales standing before Captain America, shield glinting in sun, future trembling on knife's edge, and each variation carried different outcome, different cost, different tragedy. In some versions Ulysses saw Miles struck by stray blast. In others, Steve pierced by energy wave meant for someone else. In others, no fight occurred at all. And, in more than one, Carol and Tony destroyed each other before Miles even arrived. These visions crashed into each other like chaotic symphony of contradictory destinies, overwhelming Boy's mind until he clutched head and screamed through psychic haze, though scream echoed only inside realm of thought, because reality outside continued moving toward confrontation, shaped not by destiny, but by choices heroes were already locked into making. While Ulysses convulsed through storm of futures, Medusa and Karnak tried anchoring him, each representing different facets of inhuman response. Medusa, compassionate queen, held his face between her hands, speaking calmly even as tremors shook building around them. Karnak observed with cold analytical precision, eyes calculating flaw in pattern even though this time flaw wasn't strategy or physical structure but ontology itself. Ulysses' very power transforming under stress of conflict, evolving into something larger, something approaching clairvoyant echo of cosmic awareness. Karnak whispered, "He is not just seeing future any longer, he is becoming part of it." But Universe did not wait for Inhumans to comprehend Boy's metamorphosis. On Capitol steps, reality unfolded with terrible grace. Tony Stark arrived first, descending from sky in Mark LX's armor, glowing with blue and gold arcs of repulsor heat, landing beside Steve Rogers with heavy thud that sent shockwave across marble surface. Tony spoke through external speakers, voice amplified but shaking with combination of fear and determination. "Steve, you need to get Miles out of here." Steve, standing solid in quiet dignity, answered with calm that cut through tension like clean blade. "I'm not abandoning a kid, because of something that hasn't happened." Tony looked at Miles, young, trembling, mask on but fear visible in posture, and whispered privately through comms, "I won't let them cage you." Miles nodded silently, heart pounding, unsure whether courage guiding him toward location of vision was strength or naive defiance. But certain future belonged to him only if he faced it. For Miles, being Spider-Man always meant taking responsibility, even when responsibility felt like weight too heavy for a teenager to bear. And so he stood between two legends, Iron Man and Captain America, feeling tiny yet strangely powerful, because his mere presence had become battlefield. Then Carol Danvers descended from sky, not like Tony in metallic precision, but like star burning through atmosphere, energy swirling around her in ribbons of photonic gold. She touched ground with authority of commander whose decisions shaped world's fate. Behind her came battalion of heroes aligned with prevention ideology, spectrum shimmering in light frequency spectrum, alpha flight agents surrounding perimeter, blue marvel hovering calmly with cosmic restraint, Medusa's Inhuman standing guard though their queen remained with Ulysses. Carol's face contorted with mixture of fear, responsibility, and sorrow. She did not want to hurt anyone, least of all Miles, but believed future depicted in vision meant doing nothing was tantamount to condoning murder. She believed preventable. She stepped forward, raising hand in gesture meant to comfort, but interpreted as threat by opposing side. Miles, she said gently, come with us. Let us keep you safe. Her voice cracked at last word. Tony stepped between them instantly, armor plates shifting as defensive arrays flared. He's safe with us, Tony said, tone sharpened by grief of losing Bruce and Rhodey. Carol's expression tightened into mask of resolve. Tony, you saw that vision. If we do nothing, Steve dies. Tony shouted back, or maybe he doesn't. Maybe the act of dragging him away is what causes everything. Heroes behind Tony braced, while those behind Carol tensed, world shrinking around confrontation, that balance between moral duty and moral danger, like unstable atom ready for fission. Steve Rogers raised voice calmly. Everyone stand down. And for a brief moment, world obeyed. Even Carol hesitated. Even Tony lowered hand fractionally. And in that pause, Ulysses' consciousness surged outward, expanding beyond physical limits of body, beyond boundaries of Inhuman Tower, beyond Washington, beyond Earth itself. Boy entered state bordering on cosmic ascension, visions multiplying into fractal storm of possible outcomes, each shifting second by second as heroes adjusted stances, as emotions rippled across battlefield, as words spoken altered trajectories of future. He saw Tony punching Carol, Carol blasting Tony, Steve trying to intervene, Miles panicking and jumping into air, Carol tackling him. Mid-flight, Tony firing missile to stop her, shield ricocheting wildly, civilians screaming, congressional guards firing warning shots, and in several visions, yes, Steve Rogers dying on marble steps, sometimes by Miles' hand, sometimes by Carol's, sometimes by Tony's, sometimes by no one at all. Collateral damage of chaos spiraling out of control. Future was not singular. Future was map of unstable possibilities. Back in Washington, Steve placed hand on Miles' shoulder. You're not a killer, he said. Not today, not ever. Miles' breath steadied. Tony glanced at Steve, silently thanking him. Carol's voice trembled. Steve, you saw the vision. Please, don't make me choose. Steve answered simply, you already did. And then, inevitability shattered. A stray bystander's phone camera set off anxiety ripple in crowd. Federal security attempted tightening perimeter. One nervous officer misread stance between Tony and Carol as escalation and shouted warning. Blue Marvel shifted position instinctively. Repulsors flickered as Tony prepared defensive barrier, and in that microscopic shift, Ulysses' psychic projection expanded again, this time not as private vision, but shared hallucination bursting from his mind like beacon. Every hero present saw future where capital collapsed in explosion of cosmic origin. All gasped, momentarily united in awe and fear. Carol blinked. Tony steadied himself. Miles clutched head in pain. Steve looked skyward, confused. And everything slowed, time stretching thin as if universe holding breath. What happened next did not match any of Ulysses' visions perfectly. Carol, seeing panic in Miles' eyes and interpreting flinch as threat, lunged forward not to attack but to restrain. Tony misinterpreted her movement as aggressive. He deployed energy shield instantly, cascading light barrier that struck her mid-lunge. She rebounded with force, crashing into marble column. Her team surged, Tony's team surged, and Washington erupted into chaos. Not because future dictated it, but because everyone acted to prevent something they feared. Miles stumbled backward, Steve catching him. Avengers collided with Inhumans, cosmic heroes with street-level fighters. Laser beams, repulsor waves, photonic blasts, telekinetic force, energy crackled across air like summer storm reaching breaking point. Carol rose from rubble, eyes blazing, chest heaving, and soared upward before hurtling downward in brilliant streak, aimed not at Miles but Tony. She struck him with force that rattled armor plates. Tony retaliated with measured precision. Though grief made calculation imperfect, he fired beam that sent shockwave through plaza. Their fight became center of storm, spinning conflict outward. Miles escaped fray, leaping onto nearby statues, shouting, "I'm not going to hurt anyone." But noise drowned words. Ulysses, witnessing battle through psychic haze, screamed as mental overload shattered barrier between perception and projection. His consciousness expanded beyond human shape, merging with cosmic stream of potentiality. He no longer saw future, he became future. In perceived vision, he watched eternity, the actual cosmic embodiment of time, approach him, acknowledging transformation. Ulysses' mind blurred as he glimpsed himself ascended beyond humanity. Medusa held him close physically, tears in eyes. Karnak whispered, "He is crossing threshold." Back at Capitol, climax unfolded when Carol, in desperate attempt to stop Tony from spiraling conflict further, unleashed full photonic energy blast, catching him off guard mid-calculation. The impact, stronger than any she had delivered before, cracked Iron Man armor, seams splitting, circuitry sparking, Tony's body absorbing shock with agony that reverberated through system. He fell, smashing into ground hard enough to embed armor into stone. Steve rushed toward them. Miles jumped down to help. Carol hovered above Tony, expression twisted by horror at what she had done. Tony's armor, flickering red warning lights, initiated emergency stasis to preserve his life. Tony whispered through failing speakers, "Please stop." Then system shut down. Tony Stark fell unconscious, not dead, but removed from war. Everything froze. Carol stared. Steve stared. Heroes stared. Battle stopped. Not because resolution had arrived, but because conductor of war, Tony Stark, collapsed. Silence echoed across plaza, heavy, aching. Carol floated downward, feet touching ground gently, trembling as realization dawned. Her blast had nearly killed friend. Not enemy. Friend. She whispered broken, "Oh God," as remorse sliced through her certainty. Miles looked at Steve. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he whispered. Steve placed hand on his shoulder again. "It didn't. That means you're free." Miles exhaled, relieved but grieving for entire community. Meanwhile, Ulysses reached final transformation. His body glowed, dissolving into cosmic radiance. Medusa cried out, "Ulysses!" But Boy's voice echoed across chamber. "I'm okay. I see everything now." He expanded into form, approaching eternity's domain. Karnak witnessed with awe and sorrow. Ulysses whispered thanks, then dissolved into cosmic stream, ascending beyond mortal plane. He was gone. Back on Earth, aftermath of battle stretched far. Tony placed into techno-organic stasis by Friday and medics. Carol confronted weight of her decisions. Steve attempted holding community together. Miles walked away, free but traumatized. Heroes dispersed, some angry at Carol, others at Tony, all shaken by how close they came to destroying each other. Civil War II ended not with victor, but with scattering future uncertain, trust shattered, and moral wound cut deep. and at center of wound was question no one could answer. If seeing the future causes war, should future ever be seen at all? Chapter 8. The aftermath of Rhodey's death and Banner's public execution hung over the superhero community like a slow-moving storm, heavy and suffocating. And as the world watched footage replay endlessly across screens, Hawkeye releasing Arrow, Banner collapsing, Carol restraining grief through rigid posture, and Tony breaking apart before millions, the fragile lines holding the superhero community together began to tear in places too deep to mend easily, driving both sides further into confrontation that no longer resembled policy debate but spiritual fracture. And in days following the trial, as Clint Barton was found not guilty due to Banner's explicit pre-recorded instruction and overwhelming evidence of imminent danger, the world interpreted verdict in radically different ways, some believing justice prevailed and Banner's own fears validated action, others believing system failed, bending under weight of Carol's influence and panic surrounding predictive justice, and in midst of fracturing opinions, the actual heroes, the men and women forced to stand on opposite sides, struggled under pressure none of them could articulate aloud. Tony retreated from world, burying himself in data, recordings, Ulysses' brain scans, meditation logs, and neurological patterns, trying to pierce veil between prophecy and possibility. He was not grieving alone. He was building something inside grief, a theory that Ulysses' visions were not objective truths, but projections filtered through personal biases and probability models. Meanwhile, Carol doubled down on belief that Ulysses was gift to humanity, tool capable of saving countless lives by revealing threats before they happen, and she expanded operations using his visions more aggressively, detaining suspects preemptively, raiding facilities believed to be connected to future crimes, and intercepting individuals who had not yet done anything, trusting Ulysses' predictions with fervor bordering on religious. For Carol, every life saved justified pressure applied. For Stark, every person detained before committing crime was new wound carved into possibility of human freedom, each operation flattening complexity of future into binary version of destiny. But tensions escalated brutally when Ulysses experienced most vivid vision yet, an apocalyptic future where Miles Morales stood over body of Steve Rogers on steps of Capitol building. Rogers' shield shattered beside him, red skies swirling overhead like omen of divine punishment. Ulysses screamed in terror, collapsing in Carol's arms, projecting vision so powerfully that every person nearby saw flashes, Miles trembling, Rogers torn open, world crumbling around them. Carol froze, breath thin, processing vision with soldier's instinct. Threat identified, threat neutralized. Tony saw something else, teenager framed by future that hadn't happened. A child judged not by actions but by cosmic hallucination. Battle lines hardened. Carol dispatched teams to bring Miles in for protective custody. Word choice softening brutality but barely hiding intent, and Tony intervened, planting himself between Miles and Carol with moral intensity that turned air electric. Tony promised Miles sanctuary, swearing teenage hero would not be imprisoned, for future he didn't choose. Carol saw this as obstruction. Tony saw it as salvation, and community polarized instantly. Peter Parker sided with Miles, refusing to let another young hero be hunted because of fear. Steve Rogers, secretly Hydra in this continuity, though publicly symbol of moral clarity, declared he would protect Miles as well, further complicating ideological landscape. Jessica Drew conflicted, torn between friendship with Carol and her growing discomfort with scale of Carol's authority. Medusa and Inhumans attempted neutrality, but were targeted politically regardless. Black Panther expressed skepticism of Ulysses's objective truth, and Maria Hill worried tensions were nearing point of irreversible collapse. Miles, shaken to core, insisted repeatedly that he would never harm Steve. Horrified idea of killing symbol of heroism embodied everything he rejected. Yet Vision remained, taunting him, haunting him, spreading through hero community like prophecy, shaping reality. Tony confronted Carol publicly, accusing her of transforming justice system into pre-crime nightmare. Carol countered that Stark refused to accept responsibility for tragedies that could be prevented. The argument escalated until both sides realized diplomacy had expired. World felt shift, silent and terrible, like calm before battle, destined to scar entire era of heroism. Carol's next move radicalized conflict. Using Ulysses' projections, she launched full operation to intercept guaranteed catastrophic event. She believed detaining specific individual would prevent disaster-level future. Tony hacked into operation, blocking Carol's squads, pulling information streams, overriding targeting systems, proving Ulysses' recent vision of environmental collapse was misinterpreted. Carol dismissed Tony's interference as sabotage. Tony argued it prevented wrongful assaults. Each confrontation deepened chasm between them. But true breaking point emerged when Ulysses' powers began evolving rapidly, visions becoming so intense they triggered mass psychic projections, dragging entire groups into future scenarios involuntarily. One such vision showed cosmic entities, including eternity itself, reacting to Ulysses' growing power, suggesting he was evolving beyond inhuman potential into something approaching cosmic force. Tony used this as evidence Ulysses' predictions were unstable and potentially dangerous. Carol argued evolution meant accuracy increasing. Conflict now had philosophical terrain as wide as battlefield. Tony believed future was fluid, shaped by countless variables. Carol believed future, when shown clearly, must be prevented at all costs. So, when Ulysses projected vision of Miles standing over Steve Rogers' corpse, Carol interpreted it as imminent threat requiring action. Tony interpreted it as final proof visions were subjective, influenced by fear, context, subconscious associations. Miles became center of global panic. Media exploded. Government exerted pressure. Civilians debated morality of predictive justice. Student groups marched, either defending or condemning Miles. Innocence became secondary to possibility, and in heart of chaos, Miles whispered doubt into silence, asking Peter whether future could ever be escaped once seen. Peter placed hand on his shoulder, promising future was choice, not destiny. But world did not wait to hear. As vision spread across world, Carol mobilized full force of Alpha Flight, cadets, guardians, and her allies to intercept Miles, while Tony assembled coalition of Avengers, champions, and underground allies to protect him. The stage was set for clash neither side wanted but both felt forced into. Clash not born of hatred, but philosophical incompatibility. Steve Rogers intervened, offering Miles safe transport, but Carol intercepted them, demanding Miles' surrender. Tony arrived, armor gleaming with energy of systems built from desperation and grief. Air vibrated with tension as heroes assembled on opposing sides, mirroring original Civil War but darker, heavier, more emotional. Carol insisted future was warning. Tony insisted future was prison. And Miles, trembling between titans, whispered truth. He didn't believe in killing, he believed in choice. But, as both factions argued above Capitol building, location from Ulysses' prophecy, world held breath. Was prophecy self-fulfilling? Was presence of heroes forcing vision toward inevitability? Could Carol's fear shape future to nightmare she sought to prevent? Could Tony's defiance push events past breaking point? Psychological pressure mounted until Carol attempted to detain Miles by force. Tony intercepted, words ended, energy flared. Sky cracked with raw power as two leaders collided in desperate struggle fueled by ideology and exhaustion, shattering monument stairs beneath them. Carol, powered by cosmic force, struck with ferocity of soldier, carrying weight of universe on her shoulders. Tony, wearing most advanced cognitive reactive armor he had ever created, fought with precision born from heartbreak and need for redemption. Battle became symbol of entire conflict, two friends fighting not out of hatred, but out of incompatible visions of justice. Miles watched, horrified, feeling guilt crush him even as he remained innocent. Steve stood guard over him, shield ready. As battle escalated, bystanders watched in horror as Carol overwhelmed Tony, each blow cracking armor, each strike fueled by fear that his resistance would doom world. Tony refused to yield, even when systems failed. Carol delivered devastating strike, energy erupting through Tony's armor, collapsing him into unconsciousness, leaving him broken in crater of his own making. Silence spread. Miles stepped forward, walking calmly to exact spot from vision, steps of capital, and stood before Steve, declaring he would never kill him, proving future wasn't fixed. Vision dissolved. Carol realized truth too late. Tony's body lay motionless, mind preserved only by emergency systems. And so, Chapter 8 of Civil War II ended not with death of prophecy, but death of certainty. Miles proved future could be changed. Tony paid price for defending it. Carol paid price for believing too strongly in system built on inevitable doom. And world realized, painfully, prophecy becomes prison only when belief builds the walls. Chapter 9. The trial of Clint Barton, Hawkeye, became the moral and emotional core of the entire conflict, a moment where worlds stepped out of battlefield and into courtroom, where explosions and visions and superhuman powers could no longer drown out truth, trembling beneath surface of every argument. Because for first time since Ulysses' arrival, the question was no longer whether the precognitive vision should be used, nor whether heroes could justify acting before crimes occurred, nor whether Carol or Tony stood on right side of future. The question now was far heavier, far simpler, far more devastating. Who bears responsibility for a man executed before acting? And what does justice even mean when entire world is afraid of what might come rather than what has been done? Clint Barton entered courtroom devoid of his costume, stripped of bow, quiver, and identity that defined him for decades. He sat not as avenger, nor as hero who saved world countless times, but as defendant in murder case that pierced through entire superhero community like cold blade. Bruce Banner's death was not battlefield casualty, not collateral damage, not tragic accident. It was deliberate, premeditated act carried out by man Banner trusted. At moment Banner was unarmed, calm, stable, present only in discussion meant to determine his fate. And yet, Barton defended himself with clarity that unsettled even those who hated what he had done. He argued that he shot Bruce Banner because Banner asked him to, that Banner, terrified of Hulk's return, had privately given Clint specially crafted arrow capable of killing him instantly, instructing him to use it if ever saw slightest sign Hulk was coming back. Clint explained he saw a moment in Banner's eyes, a flicker of green, an expression of fear overtaken by something darker, and in that instant he believed Banner was transforming. He fired, killed friend, fulfilled promise, and as he testified, courtroom became silent weight, pressing onto shoulders of every hero listening, because revelation exposed truth no one was prepared to admit. This entire war began because no one trusted themselves enough to let future unfold without interference. Carol Danvers watched testimony with heart numbed yet burning, believing she had acted to prevent catastrophe, that using Ulysses's visions could save countless lives, but now confronted with reality that her decision to bring Banner before committee created conditions for someone to kill him without trial, fueled by fear, not of man but of vision. Tony Stark, grief tearing through him in waves, locked eyes on Barton, fury swirling beneath restraint. For Tony, hearing that Bruce gave approval did not absolve Clint. It incriminated world that had made Banner so terrified he would rather die than risk losing control. Testimonies followed. Carol explaining vision showed Banner killing heroes, Rogers describing Banner's stability and genuine efforts to manage condition. She-Hulk still hospitalized after battle with Thanos, testifying via recorded statement insisting visions weren't facts but probabilities, reminding court that fear turned probability into certainty long before reason intervened. Every testimony, every argument, every detail added complexity until courtroom resembled battleground where truth, fear, ethics, loyalty, and guilt collided with force equal to any superhuman fight. Outside courthouse, world divided. Protesters demanded justice for Banner. Others defended Barton as hero who prevented unimaginable destruction. Media built entire narratives around morality of precognition, right to self-defense, danger of vigilante justice. For first time in years, heroes were not facing cosmic threat nor global catastrophe. They were facing society holding them accountable, and universe, for all its alien invasions and multiversal collisions, had nothing as terrifying as ordinary human judgment. When jury deliberated, tension in courtroom became unbearable. Heroes stood in silence, Carol rigid, Tony trembling, Clint still as stone, Rogers bowed in sorrow. Verdict arrived not with applause nor outrage, but with quiet shock, not guilty. Jury concluded Clint acted under genuine belief Banner was transforming, invoking self-defense and acknowledging prior agreement between men. It was legal victory, but moral devastation. Carol felt vindicated in belief visions mattered. Tony felt betrayed by system meant to protect humanity. Clint felt broken, acquitted but condemned by guilt no court could erase. Trial did not end war, it accelerated it. It drew battle lines clearer than any prior conflict. Tony left courtroom knowing future built on vision-based justice was unacceptable. Carol left believing she was closer than ever to proving predictive intervention necessary. World left fractured, and Ulysses, whose visions had sparked death, saw yet another future immediately after verdict, one that would ignite final stage of conflict and lead heroes toward the battle destined to break them forever. Chapter 10. The world watched from the uneasy stillness between headlines in shock as the second superhuman civil war reached the point where consequences became irreversible. And in those hours when grief finally outran reason, the divide between Carol Danvers and Tony Stark, once colleagues, once allies, once symbols of opposing philosophies, held together by fragile respect, expanded into gulfs so deep that heroes hovering around them could no longer see bottom, nor predict whether either side would emerge unbroken, and Chapter 10 of this long descent begins in silence that spread across Carol's command center, the moment word arrived that Ulysses Kane had experienced another vision. This time he did not scream in panic, nor convulse beneath weight of possible futures as he had during Thanos' arrival, nor collapse in terror as he did when he foresaw Bruce Banner's monstrous transformation. Instead he stood still, eyes unfocused, breathing shallow, and whispered single name, one that froze Carol Danvers mid-stride and turned every operative in room toward him with dread that felt both familiar and unbearable. The vision was not just another prediction of violence, it was not explosion, assassination, or invasion. It was future event wrapped around lone figure, a hero who had spent years walking line between law, survival, and reluctant redemption. Miles Morales, the young Spider-Man, was shown standing atop Capitol building in Washington, D.C., the body of Steve Rogers lying lifeless at his feet. No alien warlord, no cosmic threat, a child, a legacy hero still navigating world that never stopped reminding him he was too young for a burden he carried. The image tore through command center like blade. Carol felt something break inside because she had sworn every death in this conflict would mean something. But now prophecy placed blood on hands of boy who had become symbol of hope, not fear. Carol believed in Ulysses. She believed precognition was tool that could prevent catastrophe. But the vision struck something deeper, brittle in her conviction, responsibility toward future, toward institution, toward civilians, and toward Miles himself. She did not hate him, nor distrust him. She feared the image of future was warning she had obligation to interpret. In the hours that followed, Carol acted not with malice but with certainty sharpened into steel, mobilizing strike teams, issuing containment protocols, and deploying personnel around Capitol before Miles ever arrived. Meanwhile, images of Ulysses' vision spread among heroes at light speed, and at Avengers Tower, Tony Stark saw footage with expression twisted into grief, fury, and exhaustion because he knew Carol would act, knew she would justify any measure, knew she would treat prediction as inevitability rather than possibility. Tony had witnessed too many timelines branch into ruin. He knew future was fragile, fluid, never fixed. And he knew Carol's faith had turned into dogma. With every vision, her resolve hardened. With every prevented disaster, belief in Ulysses' infallibility deepened. And now prophecy threatened teenager Tony had mentored. Someone he saw as little brother, he refused to lose to political panic. As police cars swarmed Capitol, Tony launched suits so rapidly Friday barely kept up with diagnostics. He broadcast message across multiple channels. Carol, don't do this. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Duty carved her into shape she no longer recognized. Meanwhile, Miles Morales, still processing surreal accusation, stood speechless as the image of himself killing Steve Rogers replayed in his mind, each frame a weight crushing his chest. Peter Parker, standing beside him, tried reassuring him with voice steady but hands trembling. That's not you. It won't be you. We don't become murderers because someone sees a nightmare. But Miles felt currents dragging him toward Capitol, not as prophecy but as test of autonomy. He refused to run. He refused to be defined by fear of future someone else believed for him. In moments where world feels ready to swallow him, Miles Morales often reacts with courage he does not yet understand, and so he chose to go, not to fulfill prophecy, but to confront it, to prove future was not prison. Tony Stark intercepted him midair. Not physically, emotionally, he pleaded, begged him to turn around, but Miles, standing on invisible line between destiny and agency, simply said, I need to see it for myself. That sentence became fault line, and at Capitol steps Carol Danvers landed in streak of photon fire, flanked by operatives positioned across rooftops and ground with instructions to restrain if Miles made single threatening motion. Steve Rogers, unrelated to vision yet central to its meaning, was present not as target but as man refusing to abandon hope in child others feared. Carol approached Miles carefully, posture tense, voice controlled, offering containment under protective custody until threat assessment is concluded. Miles shook head. I'm not going anywhere. I didn't do anything. And Carol, trapped between compassion and doctrine, whispered, That's what we're here to prevent. The air thickened. Birds fell silent. Even civilians seemed to sense tectonic shift. Tony Stark's suit streaked from clouds, repulsors roaring across sky as he landed between Miles and Carol, with energy of man carrying entire war inside his ribcage. This stops now, he said. Carol did not back away. Her eyes, normally gentle, protective, bright, held mixture of frustration, fear, and exhaustion, parallel to Tony's. They were mirror images ruined by grief. Tony argued future could change. Carol argued future must be prevented. Tony insisted Miles was innocent. Carol insisted innocence did not negate precaution. Tony said predictions were chains. Carol said they were shields. Both believed they were saving world. Both believed other was destroying it. The argument escalated, words turning sharper, logic dissolving beneath months of tension, grief, and ideological fracture. Tony invoked Rhodey's death, Carol's lover, accusing Carol of letting guilt guide judgment, of refusing to admit vision cost lives already. Carol invoked Bruce Banner, and deaths avoided since Ulysses' arrival, accusing Tony of clinging to trauma rather than solutions. It was not confrontation of enemies, it was confrontation of broken friends. But the moment Miles whispered, I'm not going to kill anybody, both sides lost capacity for reason. When Carol attempted to place Miles under arrest, Tony stepped between them. When Tony attempted to escort Miles away, Carol blocked path. Hero lines blurred, tension snapped, and battle erupted, not symbolic, not ideological, but physical. Energy crackled, wind roared, concrete cracked under impact. Iron Man's repulsors clashed against Carol's photon blasts, each strike echoing across Capitol Dome. Avengers, X-Men, Inhumans, Champions, every group divided behind leader they believed. Some fought, some tried stopping fight, some watched helplessly. The world swallowed breath, witnessing superhuman war ignite at heart of American government. Miles stood paralyzed, seeing prophecy within reach, yet determined not to move. Steve Rogers moved to protect him. Peter Parker stood guard beside him. And while cosmic precognition had painted the image of Miles killing Steve, reality revealed something else. Miles would sooner die than fulfill nightmare. As Carol and Tony's battle escalated, Ulysses, overwhelmed by intensity of conflict, fell into deeper trance, visions firing through him like lightning. He saw multiple futures branching in fractal sequences, Tony defeating Carol and global militaries reacting in panic, Carol subduing Tony and half-world turning against Inhumans, Miles fleeing and becoming symbol of fear, Miles staying and becoming symbol of choice. Every future splintered, he screamed. Reality bent around him. As battle reached catastrophic crescendo, Carol launched a strike heavy enough to pierce Stark's armor. Tony retaliated with energy pulse amplified through nanobots. Shockwave rippled across plaza, statues shattered, windows exploded, heroes were thrown aside, and in moment of terrifying vulnerability, Carol struck Tony with final blow, beam of energy so intense it destabilized armor's structural integrity. Tony's body fell, hard, crashing into Capitol steps with sound that silenced battlefield. The ground trembled. Carol froze, realizing too late she had crossed threshold she swore she never would again. Miles gasped, Peter screamed, and world watched Iron Man fall unconscious, armor smoldering, systems failing. Medics ran in, machines beeped erratically. Tony was alive, but barely. Carol landed beside him, shaking with horror. guilt and disbelief. She whispered, "Tony, please don't." But damage was done. Wars she tried to win for peace ended with friend broken by her hand. In aftermath, Ulysses unleashed final vision, future so far-reaching it shattered his consciousness. He transcended form, ascended beyond humanity, moving into cosmic existence. His final parting left Earth without oracle it depended on, and while government praised Carol as guardian, world saw fracture deeper than ever. Steve Rogers himself, manipulated by Hydra in parallel storyline, ensured war served long-term authoritarian agenda. But Miles Morales, protected by Captain America, proved prophecy wrong. He did not kill Steve. He walked away, free, innocent, victor of moral battle. And as Chapter 10 closes, World stands battered by conflict rooted not in villainy, but fear of future. Tony lies comatose. Carol stands triumphant but hollow, crown of responsibility heavy with grief. Miles, child a center of prophecy, walks away carrying truth. Future is possibility, not sentence. And in shadows, new fractures prepare to surface, ones that would shape Marvel Universe for years to come. Chapter 11. In the aftermath of a conflict that had already reshaped alliances, shattered friendships, and carved permanent wounds into the fabric of superhero history, the closing days of the Second Superhuman Civil War unfolded not with explosions or triumphant speeches, but with a kind of exhausted stillness, a breath held too long across a community broken by its own moral divide. And it was in that stillness that truth, raw, unwelcome, and unavoidable, finally rose to the surface, as both factions found themselves standing amid the ruins of what had once been trust. The world continued to spin, unimpressed by the righteousness each side had claimed, and in the center of that uneasy quiet stood Carol Danvers and Tony Stark, two leaders who had marched their armies across ethical fault lines, believing in the necessity of their cause, even as each decision pushed them deeper into shadows from which neither would fully return. Carol, hardened by 1,000 future projections she could not forget, shouldered burden of believing she had saved lives by acting preemptively, while Tony, embittered by the death of Rhodey, the near-fatal attack on She-Hulk, and the manipulation of a young Inhuman whose visions had ripped apart the hero community, believed Carol's path was erosion of freedom disguised as safety. Ulysses, whose precognitive power had set entire war into motion, now stood on precipice of transformation, undergoing evolution that even the Inhuman royal family did not fully understand, his body phasing into spectral patterns of probability as he drifted through branching timelines with awareness stretching beyond human comprehension. His final visions triggered last confrontation between Carol and Tony, culminating in attack that pushed tensions past breaking point, causing confrontation at the Triskelion that would become defining moment of war's end, one that would not be remembered for victory, but for the irreversible scar carved. As Ulysses' mind expanded beyond physical existence, he experienced visions not in linear structure, but as overlapping symphonies of possibility, worlds that might be, worlds that would never come to pass, worlds that depended entirely on choices made in the next few minutes. In his final moments before transcending, he witnessed the confrontation in which Carol, desperate to act before another catastrophic future took shape, unleashed blasts powerful enough to incapacitate Tony Stark at molecular level, overwhelming his defenses, his armor, and his fragile emotional state. Their clash did not represent good versus evil, but two wounded soldiers fighting for opposite interpretations of same ideal, protecting world from horrors they had seen. Tony's collapse was as shocking as it was symbolic. Hero who had spent years relying on intellect, technology, and preparation found himself unprepared for inevitability of Carol's force, and when he fell, worlds seemed to fall with him, leaving those around him suspended in silence that carried weight of betrayal, grief, and fear for what came next. Carol stood over him, victorious in technical sense, yet devastated, her expression unmoved on surface but fractured beneath armor of command, understanding too late that victory in this conflict carried no triumph. Around her, heroes watched with mixture of horror and resignation, Peter Parker clenching fists until knuckles whitened, Kamala Khan staring in disbelief at woman she had once idolized, T'Challa analyzing scene with cold precision, and Medusa watching as Ulysses drifted fully out of physical form, now beyond reach of human and inhuman judgment alike. Ulysses's final visions did not fade, they unfurled in small, brief glimpses across minds of surrounding heroes, cosmic threats looming, empire-level conflicts, Galactus reborn in new forms, futures shaped not by Carol or Tony but by forces neither faction could control. When Ulysses vanished into higher dimensional existence, granting one last vision to Old Man Logan, it became clear his power had never been deterministic truth, only potential, a guide that could illuminate dangers but not dictate responses. That understanding, late, painful, and incomplete, settled across battlefield like cold wind brushing over debris. Captain Marvel, standing amid shock and judgment, braced herself for consequences she knew would fall upon her. Despite belief in righteousness of her actions, she felt weight of every decision she made. Every minor surveillance program expanded, every arrest based on prediction rather than evidence, every confrontation that drove wedge deeper between communities. In wake of Stark's collapse, she was confronted by Maria Hill, T'Challa, Medusa, and others, each offering neither condemnation nor forgiveness, but recognition that conflict had reached point where continuation would no longer be war. It would be collapse of entire heroic structure, holding Earth together. Tony's body, preserved through unknown stabilization protocol activated automatically by his armor and hidden failsafes, was placed under care of Beast, who monitored him with fear, guilt, and scientific curiosity. Beast assured Carol, more out of moral obligation than sympathy, that Tony was not dead, but suspended in state between consciousness and technology, his neural map incomplete but salvageable, his future uncertain. Carol visited his comatose form, sitting beside sealed containment chamber in silence, reflecting not on righteousness of her cause, but on costs she had not anticipated, realizing that wars are never won by those who carry the flag, they are simply survived by those willing to bear the consequences. She whispered apology she knew he could not hear, though perhaps some part of Stark, cybernetic, spiritual, or residual received it. In political aftermath, world governments applauded Carol's efforts, interpreting her preemptive approach as forward-thinking mechanism to ensure global safety. The President offered her full support. A new headquarters rose, resources were expanded, alliances deepened, yet applause came with unease. The public saw her as hero, the hero community saw her as warning. Heroes who had marched under her banner, Spectrum, Alpha Flight, Hawkeye, Blue Marvel, stood shaken, no longer entirely certain where moral lines lay. Carol herself wrestled privately with guilt, experiencing moments of dissonance between protector she wished to be and symbol of authoritarian caution, some now perceived. Tensions persisted, subtle fractures beneath surface of attempted unity. Meanwhile, Tony's faction mourned quietly. Peter Parker blamed himself for not stopping escalation sooner. Luke Cage questioned role of heroes within system capable of weaponizing their abilities against own members. Doctor Strange contemplated implications of precognition on free will. Kamala Khan disbanded from Carol's mentorship, founding champions as response to disillusionment. And Jennifer Walters, recovering slowly from a near fatal injuries, faced trauma reshaping her identity as She-Hulk, burdened by memory of battle that nearly killed her due to prediction rather than action. Elsewhere, Inhumans confronted loss of Ulysses, not as casualty but as departure into cosmic unknown. Medusa closed ranks, protecting remains of his visions and safeguarding Inhuman legacy. Karnak, certain from beginning that precognition was flaw rather than gift, meditated on inevitability of conflict where power of prediction destabilizes morality of choice. The royal family retreated from broader political sphere, understanding their involvement had become catalyst for human distrust. But most profound aftermath unfolded not in institutions or headlines, in the subtle reconfiguration of trust among heroes. Avengers, fractured by earlier civil war, shattered further. X-Men distanced themselves from conflict, wary of any future in which predictions could justify preemptive eradication. Guardians of the Galaxy, those who observed war from cosmic distance, offered Carol mixed sympathy, recognizing difficulty of leadership in chaotic universe, yet warning that controlling future invites tyranny. Carol stood before assembled heroes weeks later, addressing them with mixture of humility and determination. Her speech, understated yet honest, acknowledged cost of war, reaffirming belief that preventing catastrophe requires readiness, but rejecting absolutism that guided her earlier actions. She vowed to rebuild trust, not as commander, but as equal. Her promise was not universally accepted, but it was step toward healing. Some forgave her, some did not, but all understood the world changed irrevocably. As final resolution to conflict, Ulysses's warnings, recorded, catalogued, and carefully contained, became foundation for new philosophical debate shaping hero community. How much of future should be known, and how much should remain free to unfold? Some argued visions could still save lives if used with caution. Others argued any future knowledge inevitably corrupts present. Both sides found truth in their arguments. The closing chapter of Civil War II did not bring harmony, it brought fragile coexistence. Heroes walked away bearing scars. Carol continued leading global initiatives with tempered judgment. Tony remained in stasis, his consciousness preserved as digital map that would later guide creation of AI. Stark, a new entity carrying echoes of man who had fallen. World survived, but trust, once broken, did not return easily. And perhaps that was lesson war intended to teach. Power to predict future is not blessing but burden, and belief in certainty is illusion even heroes cannot afford. Civil War II ended not with winner, but with understanding. Future is not something to be controlled, it is something to be faced. Carol learned that. Tony paid for it. The hero community lived with it. And world, always fragile between safety and freedom, continued forward, forever aware that even prophets cannot save it from consequences of fear.